Crop Talk on Market Journal is supported by Nebraska's soybean farmers and their checkoff. Finally, here on the show today, white mold has been an increasing threat for soybean producers across the region. During these slower winter months, there can be some steps you can take to reduce the risk of white mold in your fields come spring and fall. We're recently joined by Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Dylan Mangel to get his advice on that subject. It's good to see you. We're in the midst of winter meeting season, which means you're hearing from a lot of producers what went well, some of the challenges also in 2023. I understand something you're getting asked a lot about right now is white mold. What's the story there?
That's right. Yeah, we've had a surprising amount of questions on white mold. We knew it was bad in 2023, but I just don't think we knew exactly how bad it was. And from growers all over the state, especially in areas we're not used to seeing it, growers really experienced it last year.
Okay, let's back up a little bit, talk about what is white mold and what's it look like out in the field.
So white mold is also called sclerotinia stem rot. It's a fungus that's going to grow, it's going to stay in the soil, and then when the moisture gets right in the springtime, it'll pop up and it'll infect those plants. The problem with this one is it can stay in the soil for a long time. You're really not going to get rid of it once it's in a field. But what happens when it gets on those plants is it infects through the flowers, and then there's a period of delay before you start to see symptoms that could last several weeks. And then into August, you'll start to see those symptoms show up on the plant, which looks like a cottony, fluffy mold growing, starting on the stem from where that infection point was and radiating up and down that stem until it kills the plant.
What kind of yield loss is associated with white mold?
It really depends how many plants you lose. So we've got growers that you'll experience just a couple intermittent plants that were lost and you're not going to see a lot, but those plants will be dead. But there's also cases where it'll show up in big pockets, and on the yield monitor you'll just see yields drop down to basically nothing where you've lost the plants in those areas.
And where geographically in Nebraska are you hearing reports from this past year?
So traditionally it's been in northwest or northeast Nebraska in those rain-fed areas, but what happened this year is it really showed up as far south as the Kansas border, not at high levels, but there's definitely pockets through the irrigated parts of the state as well as that traditional area up in the northeast that really suffered from it.
You mentioned flowering is kind of the time where you're going to start to see this in irrigated and maybe more heavily rain-fed areas or where it's been impacted. Why is that? Bring us through the science of how this works.
So the plant is only susceptible during flowering because that fungus has to infect those flowers, and that's the only place it can get into the plant. When you get moisture and that aligns with that flowering window, and you know there's a lot of flowering windows on beans now that are quite long, so when you get that moisture, those spores are going to develop then on the soil surface, and they'll move up and they'll infect those plants right when that moisture shows up if the plant is susceptible then.
Obviously, as we look back on last year, nothing we could do about it in the rearview mirror, but moving forward, if you identify white mold in your field, what can you do in 2024 about this?
So in 2024, if you start to see white mold, the only thing you can really do in season is try to protect those plants. You've got to get there and protect the plants before they're infected though. That's going to be happening when flowers are present. So as soon as R1 shows up and you've got flowers present, and the plant grows to be more susceptible as there's more present, so into R2, that's when you need to protect those plants. This also aligns with canopy closure. So you've got to protect those flowers. I generally recommend aiming treatments towards late R1, early R2, right about when canopy closes is going to be that optimal timing to protect those with a foliar fungicide. Now that's what you can do in season. But leading into 2024, if you still have time in variety selection, think about pitting a variety on those white mold fields or fields that have had a history of that in the past that has a good rating, a good disease rating for white mold.
You told me too, how much space you have in between your rows might play a factor, those with a 15-inch spacing.
Yep, so when it comes to white mold, it's all about managing moisture in those plots and that humidity under the canopy surface. So growers have had success in the past moving from 15-inch rows to 30-inch rows where they've had a history of white mold. Now, there's downsides to increasing your row spacing too, so think about what your other problems are and decide if white mold's severe enough. Opening those rows up a little bit is going to let air get through there a little bit better. It's going to delay canopy closure, and it'll shorten that susceptibility window for white mold.
The key here, Dylan, is we're in these winter months. Think about what happened in 23. Let's be a little more, proactive. See what we can do. Seed selection and row spacing row spacings here ahead of the 2024 growing season. Final word is yours, Dylan. What else do you want to share?
If you've got any other questions on that, go to cropwatch.unl.edu and search for white mold.